Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another speed build for the Disney Save. Today we're going to be starting off with the very first build in the brand new world. I am starting Oasis Springs for the Disney Save. Finally, this is definitely a world that has been very requested. It's a base game world. It's something that a lot of people have been looking forward to since the very early days of the save file. And my patrons actually picked this one. They get to vote on the next world. Usually, every once in a while I pick for myself, but a lot of months I will run a poll when we're ready to do a new world to let them pick, and they chose Oasis Springs, which is exciting. There are a lot of movies going into this world. It is a big one. I don't think I have done a world of this size since Willow Creek. This might be one of the, if not the second biggest, or like right around Willow Creek size that I have done. And recently I've been like kind of banging out a lot of smaller to medium sized worlds to bulk up the Disney Save. Henford on Bagley was also another really big one. But I'm excited overall. There are a lot of fan favorites that are going into this world, and there's so many lots, so there is a lot of room to do a lot of really great ideas. This isn't like Sulani, where we didn't have enough space to accomplish everything that could have possibly gone into it. This world is so big that I even struggled to fill some of the spaces, but it all ended up coming out really, really great. I'm excited. There's going to be quite a few, starting out with Aladdin here today. We are building Agrabah Market. I feel like this is a no-brainer. We had to do this. It's such a pivotal thing in the movie. It's where Jasmine and Aladdin meet. It's a part of the set dressing, and it's such a fun like market space that we could definitely add to the save file. So Aladdin is going to be our first film for Oasis Springs. I think I have in total possibly somewhere around 5 builds that I'll be doing. Lots of characters to come, of course, some bonus characters that have been some fan requests. It's going to be really exciting. I'm not going to give away all of the movies that will be in this world. I think something that is really fun is kind of going along with you guys and revealing things over time. Everybody has a different opinion or a different way that I feel like they would take on this project. And I've definitely learned that over time with planning with my patrons and some of the ideas that are presented to me, both good and bad. Like, I'm really excited about every idea because it feels really nice that the save has become such a collaboration of ideas and things that I'm not creative enough to come up with, and so many Disney lovers have kind of like come together to make something that I feel like embodies a lot and a wide spectrum of creativity, ideas, interesting things and themes, and some of the best lots were not even of my own design. So needless to say, I think the save file looks different to everyone. Like what you would do with a given world, what movies would go there, how it would sort of work and be planned out. I have these like, not rules, but like guidelines and criteria that I sort of follow and keep to whenever I'm creating. But there was a movie that was originally supposed to go in this world. My patrons know what it is, and I ended up cutting it. It was a pretty big decision because I'm going to put it in a future world, and it is a really big movie. I'm not going to spoil what it was supposed to be, but I will talk about it probably later on when we're closer to finishing Oasis Springs. It was kind of a big deal because in my head, whenever I thought about doing Oasis Springs, this is always a movie that I thought would go here. But I feel like what's interesting about Oasis Springs, and I think you can really feel this because it is an early world in The Sims 4 life, it is very deceiving versus the overhead view map and what the lots actually look like when you get here. And it's broken up almost into like neighborhoods that are triangular, or at least 4 kind of facing one another in circles, usually surrounded by a road. When you look at the world from the overhead map, it looks like a desert world. And it looks almost like blank enough that there's a lot you can do with it. And then when I was really getting into the details, one of the things I always do when I'm world planning is I go to every single lot and I just sort of look around, see how the environment feels, what's in the background, how much space do I have, how close together are these lots that they almost need to feel like they fit together, or are they spread out enough that I can get away with piecing them out, just to get a feel for like the environment and see if it feels cohesive or like what I can basically do with the space. And I knew that this world had some modern looks to it. I knew that it had roads. I knew that there were gas stations and things in the background, that the city skyline was sort of visible here and there. I knew all of that to be true, but what I didn't really realize about this world is that even though it has a lot of lots, a lot of them are on the medium to smaller size. So some of those bigger ideas that I had were not really working out. And then the other problem is that this quadrant situation where all of the lots and the neighborhoods are broken up into quadrants that face each other sort of in like a ring. So every area feels like it has to be cohesive, at least to me. I don't really like mixing and matching as much as I possibly can. I have to do it on occasion, and there's going to be things that are unavoidable, but if it's possible to avoid having things look kind of chaotic and messy, I will do so. So that meant in a way that I probably was going to have to group movies by area. So you'll notice for the next few videos that we're basically going to be staying in this space for the majority of the Aladdin builds, with the exception of, I think, 2 lots. The other thing is, even though this is a desert world, this area that we're currently in on the map, which I don't know the name of the neighborhood, but it's the bottom right-hand corner neighborhood if you're looking at the overhead map view, it is probably the most deserty looking when you actually play in-game of all the locations, with the exception, again, of a few of the bigger lots that are sort of like located in the middle. Some of the other quadrants had a lot of parking lots. They are definitely supposed to be like more commercially, like you couldn't really place a house there sort of vibes. And then there's one neighborhood in the top left side of the world map that is kind of grassy and green and flourishing with like obviously appropriate plants and things like that, but just didn't have that total desert vibe. So when I went into this, I originally thought easy peasy, we're gonna do like lots of desert movies. That quickly ended up changing because of how the lots actually look and some of the modern elements. This area, this neighborhood, I would say is one of the less modern looking ones. There's less sort of in the background. We do have the roads. It's an unavoidable sort of truth, and that happens with Willow Creek as well. When I was building there, we have the roads. There's sort of nothing you can do about that, unfortunately. But I think that despite all of that, this ends up turning out really nice, and ultimately the right decision was made. I went over it with my patrons talking about, you know, these are the movies that I'd like to put here. I know we were originally thinking XYZ, but it's not going to work for me for these reasons, and everybody was super supportive, and I think it's going to make a stronger world overall, even if it's what, like, I've seen some of your guys' comments, and I've seen things that people are predicting for this world, and it's a little off base, like, it's not really the vibe I'm going for, so I hope that nobody's disappointed, because I'm telling you, we've got some really fun things to come up, some things that are really big, and like this project, for example, Agrabah, this was one of the bigger builds immediately. This took me probably 2 weeks of just going through and trying to get all of the details right, and it's not a super huge lot, but because of the buildings and the congestion of everything that we've got going on here, and I really wanted that like close together market feel with lots of stalls and lots of livelihood and little street stalls where people can do street performing, or you've got like those side pathways and corridors that are a little bit more narrow but people are still selling paintings down there, or you've got hidden doorways and passageways. There's a lot going on, so I spent days and days and days just trying to go over the details, get as much in here as possible, and it ultimately created a really big lot that took me much longer than expected as usual, but it was worth all the time and effort, needless to say. Now let's talk about the build a little bit more specifically. This is a community space. I have been a little bit hesitant to use this lot type as of recent. I know I've been saying this a lot and a little bit of complaining, but since the for rent patch last December, my community space lots in particular have not been working very well. And I know I'm like a big builder, like I use a lot of pieces, especially for ideas like this, where you have this lot that can transform into 4 different things. It is a lot of tiles, a lot of pieces, and it's a lot for the game to handle. So if it was not going to let me load something, or if it was too much, this is definitely the lot type that ends up being the problem. Over in Hemford on Bagley, my current version of the Disney Save that is available had 2 community space lots that I've ultimately never been able to get fully working at the capacity that they were running before the for rent patch, which is really disappointing. I've had to reduce them to a lesser state and put them in as generic spaces or just not community spaces, basically. That being Belle's Village from Beauty and the Beast, and I have a Brave lot that transforms into various Brave locations, the Witch's Cottage and the Ring of Stones from that movie. I've had to basically reduce them because they're just not working. When you try to transform, the game ends up loading forever, so if your Sims were to vote on a new type for this lot, it would like break your game essentially, and I couldn't get it to work in testing, even though everything was fine before the for rent patch. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's not the lot itself, it's something that they they did to the coating when they introduced that patch. I've been having a particular problem with this lot type, but I couldn't do this lot without picking this lot type. It just fits so well. You want the liveliness, you want the Sims to spawn here, and more specifically, one of the options for a community space is a marketplace, which is what this is set to by default. So I had to be a little bit careful about like not over cluttering, and I know you're gonna look at this build and be like, I don't know what you're talking about, because you definitely went for the clutter. I did, but I was thinking in my head, I might have to reduce this at a later time. I'm gonna go for it and do it the way that I wanted to do this and hope that it works, and we'll go from there. If it doesn't, I'll reduce some of the pieces, I'll tone it back, but I'm happy to report that after doing the lot, it seems to be working okay. The only caveat that I had to do is that basically a community space can transform into 4 types. There's the base type, there's a garden, there's a marketplace, and then there is a crafting space that, you know, you can do crafting sort of things. All I did was put the market down exactly the same for all of the options. And then you have to change some of like the required items for the space. So the required items are there, but basically the market will never look different. This isn't one of those lots that if you vote for something new, it'll transform into something like kind of more interesting or different depending on the category. This is meant to always look like this. The level of detail that went into this, the overall look of it, I think it makes sense if it always stays a marketplace. But if you, for some reason, which by default in the Disney save, the voting system is turned off. So unless you deliberately go out of your way to do this, the base version of this lot is blank, and I had to do that to save spaces and resources. I don't like doing things like that. I really like to just cover everything and make sure everything is like pretty much flawless so no one can have any issues or complaints or anything like that. But if you vote for like the blank community space, the base version, for some reason it's gonna be blank, and that was to save memory and space with the lot and hopefully have it function as well as it possibly can. I hope you guys understand why I made that decision. Again, it's not something that I really wanted to do, but it was to make the lot as functional as possible, and it works really well in my game from what I've tested so far, so I'm gonna leave it at that for now, and hopefully if they ever fix that, then I will of course change it and fix it so that it functions completely appropriately. But my other thought was that like almost nobody uses the blank or the like original community space option. There's a couple of different reasons why I guess you could want that, but a lot of the times you're gonna want like some of the other versions. So having that one be the blank one, it doesn't really have any object requirements. It's meant to sort of be the one that you transform from. The other thing to think about too is that if this isn't a marketplace, then some of the stalls and things that I've placed down probably aren't going to function. And I feel like you really want that because that sets the scene. Both the stalls that are on the outside and sort of in the middle of the marketplace here, and then the actual buildings have additional market stalls that are newer to the game. They're actually from For Rent from the night market. You can place a lot of those down and they will spawn Sims for various tasks like cooking, and there's like a dessert table, there's a crafting table. That pack came with some additional stalls that are really thematic and work really, really well for a space like this. So if you keep it the marketplace, then you're always going to get like all of that liveliness and all of the things that really make sense for Aladdin and for like this particular faction of the film. But I just wanted to throw that out there so that you guys kind of know like the reason why that happened, and it's not something that I usually do, but it did have to be done in this case. Now the market itself, for some of those details, both just general market details and Aladdin, I'm going to try to remember everything that has been fully implemented here. But we have some stalls that are outside, and those sell various things that I felt like were appropriate or based on the film. They're also some of the recommendations from my patrons. They came up with some really great ideas. Towards the front of the market, we have several stalls that are facing one another. The ones on the right sell clothes, jewelry, perfume, fabric. It's supposed to be like more of an all-encompassing, sort of slightly higher end clothing and fabric store that also sells accessories and perfume and purses and shoes, things sort of in that category. And I am actually in this video going to be going into the buildings and decorating those as well, so you'll be able to see that the inside of the buildings typically correspond with whatever is being sold immediately outside, unless it doesn't. Like unless the stall is facing away from the opening of the building and then it's sort of like the building is owned by somebody else and someone just sort of set a stall up in front of it, which I think both could be true. The one across the way from that sells pottery, mostly just vases, various clay, some dishes and things like that. And then the store that it's connected to is actually a florist. I was thinking kind of like what corresponds corresponds with vases and pots. And of course you would want to go get some plants or some flowers and sort of like fill them up. So I put that right behind that stall. The next ones in the middle here sell a variation of, as you can see currently, one of them is primarily just candles. There is one in the alleyway in this area that sells various cooking utensils, plates, dishes, and also just like nectars and beers and things like that. I did feel like those like coordinated, like you could get a glass, a brand new glass, and then you could also get a new nectar. And then there is a stall in this area as well that sells spices and baking supplies and herbs and things like that. That totally fits the vibe. That makes sense. It's one of my favorite ones, ultimately. There is a smaller alleyway off to the side that sells paintings. I didn't even remember that we had this item. I think it's from City Living, and you can basically like display paintings that you want to sell. So somebody is like selling some sketchy paintings in an alleyway somewhere, and they've got their paintings set up, like maybe they're doing some live painting there and they're immediately putting them up for sale. We've all seen those types of things out and about when you're traveling, I feel. Towards the end of the market on the complete other side, and I haven't started decorating those, but you'll see them momentarily, there are some larger stalls that sell lots and lots of fruits and vegetables and just like a mix of actual food goods. And then there's one at the end that I decorated specifically based on the stall that is shown in the opening scene of Aladdin. When the genie is sort of disguised and he's going over like the intro of the story, he's standing in front of a stall and he kind of shows some things that he's selling at the stall behind him. So that stall is a complete recreation of that, and he's selling just like various items. It's kind of a really big mix of all the other stuff that has already been included on some of the other stalls. As far as the buildings, we'll go into some more of those later because like I said, some of them are just completely their own thing. I feel like there would be a variation of people who both own the building and then have a stall outdoors where they're trying to get people to buy in both locations. And then there are some people that this is a street market. They're just going to set up in the street, and then people have storefronts, and those places are obviously a little bit more booming if you can afford a whole store for you to sell your supplies in, and it might be completely different. So some of the buildings are selling just different objects altogether. Some of them sell food. Some of them are themed based on the brothel that Aladdin tumbles through in his introduction number in the movie. I really wanted to have like some little Aladdin details here and there, some of the parts that are shown when he is singing his main song and going through the marketplace. So there are some like hidden upstairs places. You'll definitely be able to tell what is what, but it's all like coordinated to look a little bit closer to what a brothel would be, essentially. It's very mild and tame, so no worries on that part. You could definitely just use it as like relaxation and lounging areas however you would like, really, but that is in reference to the film. Additionally, I felt like there needed to be some areas here where Sims could just like get a bite to eat and maybe sit down, so more of like a indoor cafe sort of space. And then lastly, what else do we have? Oh, the stairs and the ways that you get in and out of the buildings. Some of them are more tucked around the buildings themselves. I found that that was very prevalent in a lot of the references I was seeing. And some of them, they're just like not accessible at all. I think that people probably would live here. A lot of people would probably live right above the storefronts that they own, very similar to how we did it in Luca. But I didn't want this to be like overly complicated, and I don't want Sims to not use this as a market space because unfortunately, a lot of times what I've realized in testing is that Sims gravitate towards certain items. So if you have random Sims spawning here and then you have accessible house spaces, they'll go in and cook and use the fridge and grill, and they'll go use all sorts of items that are not really appropriate for the space and like the storytelling that people are probably trying to use this area for. So although it would be realistic that people would live here, I didn't really want Sims to have access to the homes. So if you see any of the buildings being decorated as a little house or a tiny apartment, those are inaccessible spaces. They don't have doors or stairs or ladders leading to them, and it'll just keep the general way that this lot works a lot better, I feel. I also want to mention these bridges that go across from building to building. This was very key when it comes to doing a space like this. You can see in pretty much any Aladdin reference, and I found tons, both from the actual film, the live action is being referenced here and in future builds as well. And then there are lots of games that have been made based on Aladdin. It's in Kingdom Hearts, I believe. It has had its own old school, I think it was NES or SNES version. So you can see like lots of artwork, lots of things when it comes to the market spaces of Agrabah and just like the town vibes, like how it's supposed to feel. And a lot of times what you'll see are these larger bridges or pathways or connecting buildings sort of like up top. And I wanted them to be there. They're like so important to the build, but I had to piece together some debug items in order to do this. Both a bridge and some of those Star Wars arches that are a little bit more like crumbling stones and things. I was able to make something that I feel is convincing and looks really nice, but unfortunately they don't work. If I was to put a platform or like a walking foundation underneath them, because the arches are curved, it would show straight across underneath. So I did try to make them functional, but when you choose to do those curved bridges, you really can't do a platform underneath because then it's just visible and it sort of defeats the purpose of doing the curve in the first place. So if a building is meant to be accessible and you would want to go into it, of course there are doors and ways to get there. But the bridges that go back and forth between the buildings, they do not work. They could easily work if you're okay with adding in that platform yourself, but I don't like how it looks aesthetically, so I've chosen to remove it. Recently for The Sims, in bigger news, we are getting a new expansion pack. I think it's called The Sims 4 Lovestruck. I'm generally excited about this world for a few reasons. The build and buy looks really interesting. Not like they haven't actually shown in detail the build and buy. I just mean based on the trailers and things that I've seen so far. I'm excited about like what is potentially to come. I like that they are giving us a pack that's a little bit more risky, a little bit more adult. The Sims used to have that vibe. Like even when I was younger and used to play The Sims 2 and 3, there were things in it that, let's just say, they probably weren't the most appropriate for my age, but it's not like I fully grasped what was going on anyway. And then obviously as an adult, I can reflect on it and say those were things that I do appreciate. And I like that they're kind of like going back to their roots and bringing back some things that seemingly are targeted more towards an adult audience, because we all know, although this is like a friendly game and like lots of families play it, and I love that aspect, there is a very nostalgic element to The Sims and a lot of adults play it as well. There are some things that I'm hearing, the rumor is, are going to be maybe more appropriate for me to update my brothel area, so I might be coming back here to do some updates. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the trailer, there was somebody playing a guitar on the street, and I've been personally like interested in any items that will give me street performers because they were really key for this lot. And we only have one object. It comes from City Living. It's a little bit more modern looking, obviously, and I believe it only spawns a singer. So it would be nice to just have someone that would come and play instruments in general. There are other street performers that would be really, really great and appropriate for this lot, but obviously we have to kind of like stay within the parameters of the game here. If anyone knows any other objects in the catalog that will spawn street performers, if they're City Living or not, I'm interested. Please let me know. I could only find the one object, but when I think about City Living, I think there are lots of street performers, so there's got to be other objects that do it. So if you're aware of that, please let me know, because I might dabble with it in this build. As you can see, the first store here is kind of taking shape. It matches the stalls that go on the outside of it. It's meant to sell a variety of clothing, mixed fabrics, some that are a little bit nicer, hat boxes, shoe boxes, perfumes. I added an additional stall in here that is specifically for perfume, because one of the stalls outside is specifically jewelry, one is specifically fabric, and then the one in here is specifically makeup and perfume. One thing that's good to keep in mind when you actually go to play this lot is if you want to run a stall personally, you might have to clean off one of the ones that I've pre-decorated for you. And the other thing is that Sims will spawn here to sell things, and obviously I can't control what they actually choose to sell at the stalls when you go here, which is why I felt it was best to sort of decorate the tops and give the vibes of like what it was supposed to be, because it will cover a lot of whatever they actually put out on the stall, but it's not going to function 100% to what I've actually placed down because I don't have any control over that and there's no way to really like tailor to that. I thought of this store as maybe one of the nicer, bigger, more profitable stores in the marketplace. When you come in here, it's a little bit more neatly decorated. The floors and the walls have been redone and it just looks like a slightly more more high end, maybe not the vibes of like the rest of the market, but I do feel like when the store has multiple stalls out front and they sell so many things and there is such a big space here, like they own one of the biggest buildings in the marketplace, this one makes sense to be one of the nicer, more profitable sort of spaces. So it is a little bit like cleaner vibes, but the other buildings are not so much that way. This one just kind of stands out in that regard. Above this building is actually one of those smaller apartments that I mentioned that is inaccessible, and in my mind, somebody who runs this space downstairs lives upstairs, if not an entire family. It's not decorated to be this like really extravagant, detailed thing. I really wanted to limit the item count when it came to those additional spaces that are not as important to the lot. So that upstairs area is like a mildly furnished apartment. It will be visible in the screenshots at the end of the video, but I did not include it in the actual speed build today because as you can see, we've got a lot going on and there are a lot of other buildings to go through, so some of them just didn't make the cut today. I am thinking about possibly doing a tour video of this market. I think it'll be a little bit easier to like show you guys everything and explain, so if you'd like a tour, please let me know. I normally don't do tours unless it's like a big castle build, but when it comes to these markety, multiple buildings, multiple things going on kind of builds, it might make sense. So let me know if that's something you'd like to see. Now, an idea that a patron came up with, which was perfect and lovely and exactly what I was looking for to fill up some of the space here. This building right next door, it kind of has its main door like tucked in the alleyway. So the front door to this place is a little bit hidden, it's off the path, and I feel like this might be a good opportunity to do a mystic store. Somebody had recommended that there should be a place in here to come get spellcaster items because genie and lamp and magic, and although you can't come get lamps here because I really do like the idea of like in my brain there is one lamp, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be this big coveted thing that's important to the story. There are so many other occult items and things that come from the werewolves pack, from spellcasters, from paranormal, that we can put in here as like a little shop. And if you know, you know, you can come in here and get your brooms and your wands and your familiar items and some rare pieces and things from those witchy occult packs. There's some stuff from Crystal Creations in here. And I definitely struggled with this space. I wasn't quite sure how to go about this because even though it is in the market, it kind of doesn't fit the vibe. And I didn't want to go too far off base with like all the decor, and I wasn't just like sure about the whole thing. So there's going to be a jump in the video momentarily where I just didn't know what I was doing. So I was kind of putting some things around and really not happy with how it looked. But then ultimately I do find my footing, and I feel like this actually ends up coming out to be one of my favorites of the build, and I love the blue in here. It feels a little, again, different than the other buildings, and it doesn't quite fit the marketplace, but I think it's just one of those like hole-in-the-wall, different type of buildings. I think it's almost hidden. Like you wouldn't even come here or know that this is here unless you were an occult yourself and you already like know someone who knows someone that knows you can get certain magical items from the store here. You're not just gonna like pop in. This is a for real witchy store. We're selling the real stuff here. And so again, there is a stall in here that's one of the newer ones. I think it actually comes from Crystal Creations or for rent, one of the newer packs. And it has a lot of the different occult items on it, supposedly for sale. So that would be really neat if you could come in here and actually do that in some regard. You would be able to create that yourself if you wanted to accumulate items in your Sims inventory and like sort of prepare to sell various things that match up with one of the stalls in the market and do it yourself. Like you could definitely coordinate it that way, but the game will just spawn like someone randomly, so it won't quite match up with what the game is just going to do naturally. As far as packs for this build, this is a huge variety. I am using a ton of for rent because of all of the various stalls, and there is a lot of Asian architecture that is available from for rent, so a lot of the decorations and things from that pack, some of the windows, some of the things are really appropriate for this space. We also have Desert Luxe, which is super helpful, but I'm kind of saving some of those like higher end pieces for a potential future Aladdin build, if you can guess. There were things that, although were appropriate for the desert vibes and like fit really well aesthetically into Agrabah, they were almost too nice for for the market space, like certain rugs, certain pieces. The other one is the Courtyard Oasis pack. There are some pieces in there from that I definitely used very repetitively. The light that comes in that pack throughout this build, but ultimately a lot of that stuff is just really nice and shiny, and it's got like gemstones on it, and it's gonna be perfect, but for future builds, just not the vibe of this like more rundown market space. Now we are moving on upstairs from that little paranormal shop to one of the main spaces that I mentioned previously is based on the brothel. These brothel areas are connected, and you can walk between the rooms of the brothel to one another. So there's 3 in total. There's 2 on this side that I'm currently decorating, and then there's 1 across the way. The one across the way, you would have to go downstairs and then up another set of stairs across the market space to actually get over there, but they are meant to be very cohesive. They're all decorated similarly. When you look at it, I feel like from the glowing and the lights and like the extra details, some of the things I put in here was from the new Party Essentials pack, the kit. That pack has streamers, and although streamers and ribbons are not the same thing, some of the characters that Aladdin runs into in here are kind of like wielding ribbons and just like more see-through organza sort of material, and it really gave me the vibe of streamers. So that's what we have, and I was like, we're gonna use it here. And then the other thing that I was excited about is that pack comes with confetti that you can place all over the floor, and I felt like it felt like glitter, like it's definitely the vibe. So I threw some of that sort of around on the floor. Thinking about the location of this, the time period of the movie, I do have to sort of tone it back on certain elements. Can't do like the neon signs. There's like certain things that I'm just not going to be able to get away with. So I had to do decor that I felt like was more simple than if I was actually going to do this space in a somewhat more modern sort of area, but it comes out really well. And then something that's really great, I think this comes from Tool. I don't actually know if this is Tool or a base game update, but you can change the light color in build mode now. So I changed the light color in these spaces so that they glow and they have that like pink aura, and they look really great, and they stand out from the rest of the build in a significant sort of way. Something that was really prevalent in a lot of the references was that the idea that you would be able to get to the top of the building, and the easy way to do this would have been to add the ladder, like the functional one, and then have it be just you can climb up there and you can go to the roof. But the issue with actually doing that is that unfortunately when you do place a ladder to an outside area that isn't enclosed, it marks the room below it as also being outside, and then you get outdoor lighting and it kind of looks funky. And I also was like, I don't really want to decorate the tops of all these buildings and make them super duper functional, because this is already a really big build, and the last thing I need is more stuff on the roof for Sims to interact with and have them kind of like climbing through all of these buildings. It just wasn't necessary. But for the decor aspect and like making it accurate to the movie, it was something that I needed to have. So in the debug, I was able to find, I think from Cats and Dogs, this like hatch that looks like a wooden sort of pallet that's just not in good condition. And I sunk some of those into the ceiling with Tool, and then placed again another Cats and Dogs debug ladder in all of the upstairs spaces so that you could theoretically climb your ladder to get to the top of your building and open the hatch and all that. And it gives the vibe of how it's supposed to look without the functionality that's just not necessary for this build. Another pack that's very aesthetically correct for Agrabah is City Living. There's a lot of pieces that come with that pack that work really, really well for future builds and this one, but unfortunately that is such a modern pack that a lot of it is kind of like not going to be usable for me, but some of the rugs and the details and little trinkets and things like that, they are definitely workable into the space. So I do use quite a bit of City Living in this build, believe it or not. Just as a side note so that people know, when I do my builds for the Disney Save, I primarily like to stick to the animated version of that film. If there's a live action available, I'll sometimes reference it for spaces that are not visible in the animated, just to have something that I feel like is more Disney canon to go off of. I'm very familiar with the live action of Aladdin. I saw it in theaters, I've watched it multiple times since, and I actually rewatched most of it recently before starting this first build and before doing the next build that we're going to have, very specifically because I needed some really great reference for that next one that kind of wasn't apparent in the animated version. But other than that, I am going to kind of ignore the live action version. I'm personally not a huge fan of it. I've made that no secret. it's not one of my favorite Disney live actions at all. Maybe I'll dabble in some of how they do like the costuming and things like that, especially if we have some more stuff available in the catalog that fits better. And I'm going to be picking up some of those cast kits that I really just don't own. I pretty much own none of the Create a Sim kits, but there are some that have come out that lean a little bit more towards the culture here, and it's going to work really well with the vibe. So I think there's 2 or 3 that I'm going to be picking up that'll hopefully help with like the costuming aspect and dressing the characters appropriately and like making them look as much like they possibly can. I'm already dreading Jasmine's hair more than anything. I can think of one in the catalog that really would work well, but it's not perfect by any means, and there's some really great custom content versions of Jasmine's hair specifically. So I think it's just one of those characters, kind of like Meg, where she has like this very specific hair, and I'm gonna have to put that to the side and just do the best that I can with what I have. But I am dreading it a little bit because I feel like she's just not gonna fully resemble herself without a little bit of CC in this instance. Even Jafar, I'm also kind of thinking about that in the back of my head, but we'll see. I usually pull it off. We'll see what comes. This space that I'm currently decorating is actually just like a general restaurant. This stall sells seemingly, I've not used it yet, so I haven't actually played with this individually, but according to the description, it mentions that it just sells food, which I feel like obviously we needed to have. And there is a courtyard space across the way where you can go upstairs and eat, but there's also some little tables inside here. I wanted it to be like crammed, minimal decor. I looked up some references that are not appropriate for like the time period, but maybe more like modern looking ones, just so that I could get the vibe, especially for places that like I haven't traveled and things like that. I wanted to have some reference to go off of, so I tried to keep the decor sort of minimal. It is a market, it's a street market, and they're really not messing around. Like, they're there to sell good food, and that's it, and you get what you get. And there might be a couple tables on the inside, and there might not be. You might have to go take it and walk, or go find somewhere to sit outside. That is the vibe. Across the way from that space, there is another one of those night market stalls from For Rent that's sort of similar, but it's specifically designed to sell just desserts, which of course is very appropriate for the theming of Aladdin. And that one I don't believe I've included in today's video. Again, more reasons to probably do the tour video. There were so many little individual buildings and so much to do here that I just couldn't possibly do all of it in the video. It's already very long as it is. And to be honest with you, some of it I just didn't film, because sometimes I feel like when I'm filming, I get this like feeling of being watched and I just don't perform as well. I know that that sounds so silly, but I feel like some of my best work comes off of not recording sometimes. If I turn it off, I instantly have creativity and imagination, and I feel like I can just come up with whatever I want. Or if something's going to take a really long time for me to work out and I'm trying to like figure out how to piece it together and I don't quite know, I'll turn the recording off because I don't know how long that's going to take, and I know it's not going to make for a good video, and then I end up kind of forgetting and I do a whole build and I'm like, I don't have as much footage as I thought I did. So over the course of like multiple weeks of recording this, I definitely did not do every single space and include it in today's video. There's bathrooms on the lot and the courtyard where people can eat as well. It's a little bit more minimalistic and I didn't feel like it needed to be included. This space is where the crafting stall is. That is meant to generate like different craftable items. It looks like there's a little space to sell paintings. I haven't used this in game yet, so I don't know how this works. There's possibly like a place to hang things or like knitted sort of items on the back part. Hopefully it all sort of like spawns in and auto generates. That's the way that I understand it. This space also has items that you can physically use to craft and make your own stuff, like the candle making table, which is a little bit more modern looking, but definitely still works for the space. And then the woodworking table tucked in there as well definitely works. And then to close out the video today, I believe the last building that you'll be seeing is the inside of the florist, where again, I have the stalls outside selling more pottery and vases and things that you can sort of like put your plants into. I wanted to have some flower arranging tables in there as well so that you can go in and use them and actually do that if you wanted to. Ultimately, thinking about this space as a community space, if you want it to function properly, there needs to be lots of things for Sims to do here. So they need to be able to use gardening and be able to like create things. That's ultimately what the lot is designed to do, even if I'm using it in just sort of this capacity of being able to change between multiple lots. It's meant to be like something that's very functional. Sims get a lot of skills here. There's lots of things for them to interact with. So I do try to keep that in mind, even kind of like combining those two ideas together. There is a stall in here. You could come in here and be a little florist. You can sell anything you want really, but it's designed mostly mostly to be a florist, and I feel like this place is a little bit nicer as well. I've used some more of those like really pretty intricate sort of tiles from For Rent in here. We are in the desert, so I'm kind of keeping that in mind. I wanted there to be plants, but it has to be very tropical and a little bit minimal, like not super bright flowers or anything like that. Things that make sense, I feel, for the space, and also for like the vibes of Oasis Springs as well. Jungle adventure, paranormal, For Rent, those plants are definitely going to work really well here. As far as what is to come, you can expect a lot of Aladdin builds and some characters coming up shortly after that. We've got 2 more Aladdin builds, and then I'm going to show the first character, which I haven't even made yet, but I'm excited to bring to life. Patrons can check that out super early, coming super soon. And we'll be sticking kind of to this neighborhood, generally speaking. There's going to be lots of Aladdin in this area, so the lot right across from this will actually be the next video. And of course, it's Aladdin themed. I hope you stay tuned for that. Let me know what you thought of today's build in the comment section down below, and if you'd like that tour video that I mentioned. If you'd like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box down below or the one at the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will talk to you all in the next one.